Gretchen, welcome. I'm so excited we get to have a conversation about the most fun topic of the day, in my opinion, happiness.
Yes. I'm so happy to be here.
I want to start out a little bit about your background. You had a career in law. You've clerked for Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. How did you get into happiness research? Were you unhappy in your former job?
Yeah, so I did start out my career in law, and it was actually when I was clerking for Justice O'Connor that I realized that I wanted to be a writer. And the Happiness Project, which is the book that a lot of people think is my first book, was actually my fourth book. So I was sort of a classic example of somebody who spent 10 years to be an overnight success. But I got the idea for the Happiness Project, which led me into kind of happiness and habits and human nature, which is my subject now. In a very ordinary moment, I was in a crosstown bus, and I had one of those opportunities for reflection that you don't often get in everyday life. And I thought, what do I want from life anyway? And I thought, well, I want to be happy. And I thought, I should have a happiness project. And I got a huge stack of books from the library and started researching, and the subject is so inexhaustible. I've basically been studying it ever since.
How does one research happiness? I kind of thought happiness was like love, and you weren't supposed to look for it. It was supposed to find you.
Right.
How do you do it?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it's a vast subject because there's happiness itself, and then there's also everything that contributes to happiness, which is everything from relationships to health to friendship, exercise, it's everything. But I'm sort of with you in terms of like the word happiness, or like it feels like how can you pin it down? And there's something like 15 academic definitions of happiness, but I think for the everyday person that can almost become a distraction, and you start arguing about, well, you say peace, but I say satisfaction, and you say joy, and I say bliss, and like, what does it all mean? I don't know. So I think for the everyday person, I like the idea that you can say happiness, and it's big enough to include a lot of people's conception.
What did happiness look like to you? You said you set out and you said, I want to be happy.
Right.
What did that end up looking like?
Well, I'm a very kind of linear, concrete person, and so what I decided to do was I did some research, and I came up with 12 themes of areas of my life that I thought would make me happier. And these are very common. Like the first one was energy, right? Because you figure, well, if I had more energy, everything else in my life would be easier. And then each month for a year, I would focus on that area and find a handful of concrete, measurable resolutions that I thought could make me happier in that area. So for something like energy, one of the things I focused on was getting enough sleep, which is something that we all know we need, but it can be hard to get. Or for something like marriage, I had the resolution to fight right, which is to fight the right way with my husband. So that's how I did it, and I figured a year was long enough to make real change, but not so long that it just felt endless.
How does your approach to happiness or the things that you prescribe change when it comes to age? Do they change over time? Are they applicable to someone who might be a senior versus, someone who might be in their 30s or 40s?
I really think that the core things are true for us throughout our life. Like they might look different, or we might need to approach them differently, but basically it's the same thing. And one of those, and I think ancient philosophers and contemporary scientists would agree about, like, if you had to pick one thing to be the key to happiness, and this is true at every age, it's relationships. We're happier when we have intimate, enduring bonds, when we can confide, when we can get support, and just as important for happiness, to give support. And so the things that we can do to broaden our relationships or to deepen our relationships are really going to go right to our happiness. Now, of course, each age of our lives offers different challenges, and a parent of young children faces a certain kind of challenge in like maintaining friendships, and then someone who's 80 has different kinds of challenges in maintaining relationships. But I think the aim is the same. You just have to think about, well, given my circumstances and my situation, how would I go about pursuing that aim?
Well, we're here to talk about aging, so let's talk specifically about the senior population.
Yes.
One of the issues that they deal a lot with is social isolation.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, deepening bonds and creating relationships is something that's really integral to happiness. How does that apply specifically to someone in that age bracket who might be outliving friends, family, might be isolated from the people that they love?
Right. No, that is a big challenge, and this is one place where I do think that technology can play a really important role, because we would all agree that seeing people face to face is the highest value and something to strive for. But I do think that there are a lot of tools that you can use to make you feel like you're connected in a way, whether it's Facebook or FaceTime or texting or emailing or whatever it is that you feel tech savvy enough to use and other people in your network can use. And what I'm very struck by is how little connections with people really do make you feel much more connected. Like, you might think, well, I haven't seen this person in 5 years. But if you're in contact with that person, that relationship feels alive and vital. And especially like if you have mobility problems and things like that, I think that some people, I think, they dismiss technology as like, well, this is so low value. I think it really does have tremendous value. And I think there's other ways to think about, well, how could you adapt different groups? Like, people always talk about a book group, and maybe you have some people that could form a book group. Starting a book group at any age is a good way to make connections with new people. Or maybe it's an audio book group, or it's a podcast group, or you're going to read profiles from the New Yorker, archives or something. You can take a core idea and adapt it to whatever would work in your circumstances. One thing, just one last thing about relationships. One of the things adults of all ages talk about is the problem of making new friends. It's something that's so much easier when you're in school and you're surrounded by people who are like your age and going through what you're going through, and it becomes harder. One thing to remember is something called triadic closure. Triadic closure is, it is easiest to make friends with the friends of your friends. There is no easier, more elegant way to say that. It's easiest to make friends with the friends of your friends. So if you want to make more friends, try to make friends with the people who are the friends of the people you already know and are friendly with, because that is how you create a social network. It's easier to maintain. It's easier to connect with people. And so if you are reaching out, that is a good pool of people to think of. Or if you think back into your life to like a dormant friendship, someone who was like a neighbor who you saw all the time but you've fallen out of touch, or somebody you thought, oh, you're the friend that got away. I always thought we would be friends, but somehow it never happened. Look to the past and see if there's somebody you overlooked, because maybe now there's a way you can, if you felt that way, probably the other person felt that way too. So maybe you can find a friend that you didn't really connect in the past, but you could connect now.
I'm really interested that you said it's kind of about a network. I think a lot of the conversations we've been having earlier in the day are how we treat these really meaningful surface level interactions, like the person who might be bringing your meals for city meals, or the person who you're sitting next to in counseling. But it seems like a lot of the relationships that you are talking about are already kind of built on a core network. How do you think about interacting with people and building those relationships differently for people who might be, isolated or have ability issues like you just discussed?
Well, the thing that's true is that for a relationship to really give you that happiness boost, I mean, it's true that even like talking to someone who's selling you a cup of coffee in a store, even a fleeting connection tends to boost people's mood. But to have the kind of boost that you get from a friend, it can't be a casual connection. It's more than that. It's not somebody who you just talk about kind of like pop culture, what's happening in sports. That's pleasant, that's lovely, it adds to your life, but it's not what you get from a real friendship. A real friendship, you really have to have the feeling that you could confide an important secret in this person. You have to feel like this person has your back, and that does take more. You both have to want it. That can be frustrating when you feel like, I really want to make friends, but other people aren't that interested in, or maybe they don't have the time or the capacity to be my friend. So sometimes that is a challenge.
How do you work through that? I think particularly for this senior generation, people don't necessarily think of elderly people as open to new friendships and exploring new things, but they do have a lot of wisdom to share and oftentimes feel frustration in wanting to have someone to impart that to and not necessarily feeling like there's a channel for that. How would you work through that?
Well, I think that is a challenge, and it's how to find it. And I think it's so different for each of us because our circumstances, our knowledge, our set of connections are so different. But I think I think what helps, and this is sort of what I did with the Happiness Project, is to step back and think, okay, where are my connections and where can I go deeper and where could I volunteer? What's a class that I've always wanted to take? Just like to put yourself out there. It's hard to put yourself out there at any age, but I think that it can pose special challenges. But one of the things that's really important for happiness is a feeling of the atmosphere of growth. And this is, we're happier when we feel like we're learning something or teaching something or making something better, when something is growing in the world. And so I think that's something to look at, which is maybe you could teach something or maybe you could learn something. Maybe you could help fix something, like this organization where their finances are in a disaster, and maybe you could help out because you know how to do bookkeeping or whatever. But that is very important for even things like a garden, training a puppy, anything where you feel like you're making things better, volunteering, phone banking, stuff like that really makes people feel happier.
You talked about happiness in the beginning, kind of being this big, open-ended, kind of subjective.
Yeah.
What happiness means to me
Yeah.
is different for
Yeah.
a lot of different people. And I think talking about happiness in that way is such a privilege, right?
Yeah.
For you specifically, you married into a prominent family, and your book did wonderfully, spent 2 years, I think, on the bestsellers list. And it's such a privilege to be able to talk about happiness.
Yeah.
How would you advise someone who might not have privilege that presents itself in the same way? How would you help them adapt what happiness means to them and define it for themselves?
Well, I think the core things are very much the same wherever you're coming from, which is the first thing is you have to have the basics taken care of. So you worry about the basics first. And sometimes people think like it's kind of wrong or self-centered that once people aren't worried about like food and rent that they worry about happiness. But it's like, well, what do you want people to be worried about? I mean, don't you think that people should start thinking about like having meaningful relationships or whatever? Like, I think to me it seems like the right thing for people to be thinking about. So one thing to think about is relationships. One thing also is your body, and this is certainly true for older people. Our physical experience always colors our emotional experience, so things like getting enough exercise, getting sleep, managing chronic pain as much as you can, to think about your physical experience, and that also goes to your energy. And a lot of times with happiness, there are things that would make you happier, but you just feel too tired to do them. And so you're like, I know I would be happier if I took that class, but I just feel like it feels like too much trouble or too much work. So by working on energy, you make yourself more able to do things like that. And then I think there is also, it's the atmosphere of growth. Where are you going to get that in your life? Raising children is like one of the most common atmospheres of growth, but to look for that. And I think that's true no matter what your circumstances are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, to continue to talk kind of about challenges that particularly senior people face, do challenges with financial security later in life affect kind of emotional well-being? How have you seen that tension work in your research? Can money buy happiness? Is that not something people should be worried about at all?
Yeah. No, money doesn't buy happiness, but money buys a lot of things that contribute powerfully to happiness. And one of the most luxurious things that money can buy us is the freedom from having to worry about money. So certainly people's financial security and their sense of like knowing what they have and feeling good about it, that contributes very much to their happiness. Yeah, absolutely.
And if they're in a position where they are not necessarily financially stable or they're constrained, many seniors are living on fixed incomes or in places like affordable housing, how can they move through or take that into consideration as they are searching for happiness or applying your approach?
Well, I think part of it is to think about how are you going to get the most happiness from the money that you have. And so if you're living on a fixed income, you want to think very carefully about what are the assumptions that you're making about how you would spend the money that you have discretion over. Sometimes people, it's interesting, one of the things that you see in the happiness research a lot is the argument that experiences make people happier than things. Now, I think this is a little bit tricky because sometimes things represent experiences. Like, is a camera an experience or a thing? Is a bicycle an experience or a thing? Is a new dining room table an experience or a thing? But it's true that just having more stuff tends not to make people happier. And certainly I think one thing that you see as people get older is shedding, where their grip on stuff for a lot of people loosens. And they want to clarify and simplify and just have what they need. And so maybe to rethink, okay, well, this is the money that I have. How do I make sure that I'm directing it in the way that is really making me as happy as it can. Like would I be better off, instead of, should I give up, make certain kinds of trade-offs. Like I'd rather have tickets to see, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say because people are so different. Like it's hard to make generalizations like that, because people's circumstances are so different.
Absolutely. I want to ask one quick question before we go to audience Q&A. How can people be more thoughtful about the emotional well-being of older people in their communities?
I think everyone should, and I think people are more and more aware of it. I think people are just are more attuned to it, but part of it is including people, making them feel welcome in any group that's starting, not assuming that they're not interested, like not assuming something like they can't use FaceTime. You know what I mean? It's like maybe they can, maybe they can't. That's true at any age. So I think it's just being mindful of the fact that it's an important, vital part of the community and including them. Yeah.
We have time for one question.
One question. Who gets the gold star? Does somebody want to be the only person to ask a question? You know you do.
Anyone? We have one. Someone in the back. Okay. Y'all don't want to be happy? Okay. Just kidding. Well, I want to take some time to thank you, Gretchen.
Oh, thank you
so much for
Thank
being
you.
with us today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.